Welcome in, everybody. Today, we are going to talk about Donald Trump's lawsuit against big tech. So as part of the video today, what we're going to be talking about is Donald Trump's lawsuit against big tech. I'm going to bring the lawsuit up on the screen. I'm going to bring the lawsuit up on the screen. We're going to go through it. It's a class action lawsuit. The one we're going to be going through today is against Twitter Inc. and Jack Dorsey, who's the owner of Twitter. The other lawsuits that are against Facebook and Google and things like that are similar to this one, but we're going to specifically focus on the Twitter lawsuit. That's the one I've gone through. That's the one I've kind of taken notes through. It's 40 pages, so we're not going to go through all 40 pages. We are going to pick out bits and pieces to talk about what Trump is claiming, what he wants to be done as far as change, what he's asking for, what he's saying the issues are with big tech. And then at the end, we're going to get into some predictions. I'll give my predictions of what I think is going to happen in this lawsuit. But I also want to have some discussion points around whether or not we think President Trump's going to be successful in this lawsuit, what we think he could be going after, what he could be considering success or considering a win at the end of this lawsuit, if we think it's going to settle or go to trial. But I also want to get some thoughts on censoring and big tech and what everybody feels about that, just kind of as a poll of the group that is here. And so we're going to talk a lot about this. There's obviously a lot of political names in here, politicians in here from both sides of the aisle. This is politically heated. I realize that. We do have a moderator for the chat this time. And so what we're going to try to do our best is everyone relax. We're not going to change the presidential election or have any effect on it in this YouTube video. We're just here to discuss this class action lawsuit. We're here to discuss the merits. We're here to discuss the facts. We're here to discuss what's in it. We're here to discuss the legal angles. But let's try to keep all of the politically charged comments or disparaging comments about politicians or leaders who volunteer their time and volunteer their professional life to work for the benefit of our country. I realize they get paid, but it's still a service job, or at least it's supposed to be. So let's just make sure that we try to keep all of the comments as cordial and as respectful as possible throughout the entirety of this video. That'll be the goal. And hopefully we can keep it that way without too many issues. But to get into the lawsuit and to actually look at the document, I think is going to be important for us. I think it's going to be something that can let everybody know. I want to let everybody know exactly what's being claimed, exactly what's being, asked for by President Trump, exactly what he's explaining throughout the lawsuit. I think will be much more clear to everybody when we actually go through the documents. It was to me when I went through it. I had an idea of what he was going to be claiming, but I think that once you actually go through the document, it really brings it to light and what his strategy may be. So let me share this screen here. All right, so as we're looking at this, it is a class action complaint for a First Amendment violation. Okay, so that gives us kind of an indication of what he's going at, what his angle is. Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, and some other people on behalf of the class. Okay, and the defendant is, as I said, Twitter Inc. and Jack Dorsey. So this is the complaint specifically against Twitter. There are other ones with Facebook and Google and other entities. So this is a complaint for injunctive and declaratory relief. So to talk about what injunctive and declaratory relief are, injunctive relief is asking the court to do something, to stop some action or force some action. It's not for money damages. He does ask for money damages, so it's interesting that that's not mentioned in the title of the complaint. But injunctive relief, for example, is give Trump his Twitter back, let him back on Twitter. That would be injunctive relief. And then declaratory relief is for the court to actually make a declaration that something is unconstitutional, such as Section 230, which we're going to get into, that protects these social media platforms. So right off the bat, we're seeing what Trump's looking for: injunctive relief and declaratory relief. Okay. So obviously Donald Trump here is going to be the plaintiff. But paragraphs, the beginning of the paragraphs just kind of give us a factual background. It talks a little bit about how the defendant, Twitter, is a social media platform with 350 million active users worldwide, including 70 million daily active users. 500 million tweets are sent out or tweeted each day. And they reported $3.72 billion in annual profit in 2020. So it's pretty insane how big this company is and how big tech really is. And that's something that's going to be important as we go throughout the complaint. They've increasingly engaged in impermissible censorship resulting from threatened legislative action, a misguided reliance upon Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, and willful participation in joint activity with federal actors. Defendant Twitter's status thus rises beyond that of a private company to that of a state actor. And as such, defendant is constrained by the First Amendment right to free speech in the censorship decisions it makes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what this means. So I already see some of the comments. I try not to look at them as I talk so I don't get too distracted. But people are saying Twitter's a private company. You can't censor, or they can't, they're not held to the same standards as the government. They're not a state actor. They don't have to abide by all the constitutional protections, and they can create their own rules. They are a private company, right? So that's what a lot of people are arguing. So we know that that is going to be a big obstacle for Trump and his lawyers and the class to overcome, because generally private companies can make their own rules. Private companies can do what they want to do. And Section 230, which we're going to dive into a lot in this complaint, explains exactly what the protections are for these companies and why it's there, right? So Section 230 was put into place so that these social media companies would not be liable for what other people posted on their social media sites. So if somebody posts a picture of a crime, or even posts, some kind of picture or something that is criminal in and of itself, that social media company like Twitter would not be liable for it. Makes sense. It additionally protects them from most civil lawsuits. They're immune from the things that happen on Twitter because all they're doing is allowing other people to post. It's a public forum. People can talk, right? But Trump is trying to say that they have become state actors because this is not just any social media platform. This is the public. This is where free speech should be allowed. And they are working in conjunction with certain federal actors, meaning politicians. They are taking demands from politicians. They are a tool for certain politicians. They're letting politicians threaten them into censoring speech and into taking certain acts. Therefore, they are state actors because they are taken to the coercion and force of certain politicians. That's one of the things that Trump's going to argue throughout. So legislation passed 25 years ago intended to protect minors from transmission of obscene materials on the internet and to promote the growth of and development of social media companies has enabled defendant Twitter to grow into a commercial giant that now censors and otherwise restricts with impunity the constitutionally protected free speech of plaintiff and putative class members. Putative class members, which we're going to hear throughout this document, is the unknown or the yet to be found class members that have also been censored or booted from Twitter, Facebook, and all these other big tech companies. So he's saying that, and he's right in this sense, that Section 230 was really set up to protect minors, to censor illegal activity so they could take it off if somebody posts it. We've seen, unfortunately, like murders and horrible crimes posted on social media. They're obviously allowed to take that down without being able to be sued for censorship or anything like that. And they also didn't want a bunch of people to, back in the day, like 25 years ago, like he's talking about, the internet was young and it was important and we could see what it could do to help our country technology-wise. So the government did not want all these internet companies to be sued and go out of business because they couldn't afford legal fees, they couldn't afford litigation. So they wanted to give them certain protections against frivolous lawsuits, and that's what this Section 230 was really about. it was not necessarily about censoring speech like we're seeing a lot of today. And Trump is saying that they're taking it too far, and this Section 230 shouldn't give them just blanket immunity. On January 7th, 2021, defendants permanently banned the sitting president of the United States from their platform for exercising his constitutional right to free speech. Okay, so we all know what happened on January 6th, right? And if you have interest in that, we may or may not be involved in what's going on with some of those prosecutions. And we have some insight, and we're actually working on some videos to give you guys some behind the scenes information of what's going on there. That's still to come in the future. If you guys have questions about that January 6th event and what happened and what took place, get them in and we'll try to answer them on future videos, because we are going to have more content on that in the future. But for now, that's a big day, January 6th, because the 7th is when Trump was banned. And they're saying that, you know, because of that violence, and it was incited partially by his social media, that's why Twitter banned him. Plaintiff, a sitting president of the United States, was deplatformed by the defendants, as were the class members. Using the unconstitutional authority delegated to them by Congress, defendants have mounted an aggressive campaign of prior restraint against multitude of putative class members through censorship resulting from legislative coercion and collusion with federal actors. Again, there's going to be a lot of mention of politicians, federal politicians, coerced and forced big tech to censor Trump and people that agree with Trump, basically. So we're going to talk a lot about the Twitter rules and the rules of Twitter and whether or not they're appropriate, whether or not companies can have rules like this. If defendants' use of an unconstitutional delegation of authority to regulate free speech under pressure from Congress can effectively censor and impose a prior restraint to the protected political speech of a sitting president, then the threat to the putative class members, our citizens, and our United States Constitution and form of government is imminent, severe, and irreparable. So he's basically saying, if they can do this to me, Donald Trump, the president, if they can do that to me, imagine what they can do to everybody else. So this is kind of a warning shot. So here's one of the issues. Plaintiff respectfully asked this court to declare that Section 230 on its face is an unconstitutional delegation of authority. It is highly unlikely that this court is just going to say that's unconstitutional. This is not the first time that a challenge like this has been made. There have been a handful of other lawsuits that were similar to this, and lawyers have broken those down and said those really had no chance at success, and this is no different. We'll talk about at the end if I agree or disagree with that, but this has been tried before. This is not a novel or new thing that nobody's ever thought of. All right, this just talks about the jurisdiction of venue, how we got to this court, but something that's important to point out, the aggregate amount in controversy exceeds $5 million exclusive of interest and costs. So they're going to be asking for big money. All right, the parties, Donald J. Trump and Twitter, and Jack Dorsey, the co-founder and CEO of Twitter. Then we get into the statement of the facts. And really what the statement of the facts gets into is what the background, the history of Twitter, where they came from, how they started, how big they are now, which we kind of already got into, how they've been called a public forum in the past. It's funny because throughout this lawsuit, Trump references other cases between him and Biden and other people suing them for things that happened on Twitter, trying to use that as a public forum, which I think is interesting. And then also another just interesting tidbit about this is they're going to use things that happened in that case against Trump. Trump's legal argument after he was sued for blocking people on Twitter was that my Twitter account isn't subject to the First Amendment. His argument now is Twitter itself is subject to the First Amendment. So that's just a little interesting tidbit about that. Some of these arguments have already been made, and Trump was on the other side of arguing for the protections that Twitter is a private company and that he's a private actor, even though he is the president of the United States. So it's you know, sometimes your words can come back to bite you. Okay, so let's keep looking at the complaint here. Just talks a lot about, you know, how tweets work, what a Twitter user is, how they can use it. It's a social media platform. Again, 350 million active users. And now we're going to get to some of their terms of service privacy policy, and rules of Twitter, okay? So this paragraph 36 that we're going to get to, I have a question for all of you that are in here listening. Do you read the terms of service and the conditions before you hit agree to use an app like Twitter? We've had cases where people sign contracts for hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy their house and then tell us they didn't read it. So I think a lot of people don't even read these terms and conditions and these terms of services before they click OK. Trump's team basically is arguing here that the user agreement and privacy policies span 76 pages, 65 hyperlinks. They cross-reference different hyperlinks and other sections, previously defined terms, things like that. They are basically so confusing, so hard to understand, too difficult to understand, yet the users are supposed to be bound by them. So he really argues a lot of people posting and know that they don't read the terms and conditions on apps. There was a big thing with TikTok. Oh, we have a yes, somebody does read them. There was a big thing with TikTok that we got scared that they were stealing all our information, going overseas into other countries. It's still one of the fastest growing apps there is. All right, so the Twitter rules guidelines regarding hate speech, incitement, or praise of violence are vague, broad, ill-defined, or not defined at all. So another issue he has, the rules of Twitter state, violence. You may not threaten violence against an individual or group of people. We also prohibit the glorification of violence. Violent threats. We prohibit content that makes violent threats against an identifiable target. Violent threats are declarative statements of intent to inflict injuries that would result in serious and lasting bodily harm. Incitement against protected categories. We prohibit inciting behavior that targets individuals or groups of belonging to protected categories, okay? So nobody should have any issue with those rules. Trump, I think, is saying that it's too vague, but one of the other issues is it fairly enforced? Is it equally enforced no matter what side of the aisle you're on? That's one of the issues he has. He thinks it's enforced harsher against the right than the left. All right. So now is when we get into Trump trying to use his own actions as president, his own uses in the past of Twitter to show that this is a public forum, this is public use, they're a state actor or a government actor, and therefore should be subject to First Amendment protection. After his inauguration, his Twitter account became an instrument of his presidency. He utilized his Twitter account as official capacity as president. It became an important outlet for news organizations. His Twitter account operated as a public forum, serving a public function. The comments generated give rise to important public discussions and debate. His posts would generate thousands of replies, hundreds or thousands of replies in turn. Okay, so this is so Trump to say, my tweets got bigly responses, and everybody wanted to respond and reply to my tweets and like my tweets, right? So this is even his lawyers are putting stuff like this, right? Plaintiff used his Twitter account and other social media platforms to communicate directly with the American people more than any other president in U.S. history. That is correct. That is without a doubt. So here we get to some of the juice of what Trump is claiming is the problem and why there should be damages, why there should be an injunction in this case. The Democrat legislators coerce defendants to censor the plaintiff and putative class members. So he's saying the Democrats forced Twitter to censor Trump and other Republicans and people that agreed with his ideologies. And he goes through this and just kind of explains it. Democrat legislators in Congress feared plaintiffs' skilled use of social media as a threat to their own re-election efforts. I mean, the Democrat legislators in Congress feared plaintiffs' skilled use of social media. All right, so they voiced their displeasure. Okay, Vice President Kamala Harris, former First Lady Michelle Obama. They were some of the ones that voiced displeasure about Donald Trump. So below are just some examples of Democrat legislators threatening new regulation, antitrust breakup, and removal of Section 230 immunity for defendants and other social media platforms if Twitter did not censor views and content with which these members of Congress disagreed, including the views and content of the plaintiff, Donald Trump, and the putative class members. So this is important here. We're going to take a second and talk about antitrust issues. Antitrust basically is here to try to protect from certain companies getting too big, becoming monopolies, controlling an area, getting rid of smaller companies, and just having too much control over one area, over a group of people, or even over a country, like people are arguing big tech does now, some of these big companies. The issue is Trump doesn't really do a lot in this lawsuit to try to break up those antitrust issues. It's more focused on him and getting rid of and deplatforming his Twitter and how they're censoring his people and his ideologies and things like that. So let's go through what he says are the coercive acts and statements made by Democratic leaders that turn Twitter into a state actor or a public actor. Look, let's be honest. Real Donald Trump's Twitter should be suspended, Kamala Harris. But I do think that for the privilege of 230, there has to be a bigger sense of responsibility on it. And it is not out of the question that that could be removed. Nancy Pelosi. The idea that it's a tech company is that Section 230 should be revoked, immediately should be revoked, number one, for Dorsey and other platforms. Joe Biden. So again, these are the threats being made to Twitter if they didn't censor Trump. We can and should have a conversation about Section 230 as to the ways in which it has enabled platforms to turn a blind eye as their platforms are used to enable domestic terrorist groups to organize violence in plain sight. These are strong words, okay? These are not just disagreements or differences of opinion that people are having. They're saying domestic terrorists. Jack Dorsey, time to do something about this tweet. Kamala Harris. 2020 presidential candidate Kamala Harris calls on Twitter to suspend President Trump's account. If the president goes on Facebook and encourages violence, that you will make sure your company's algorithms don't spread that content. You will immediately remove these messages. And we're going to talk a lot about during those hearings where they had Dorsey and Zuckerberg and all of those tech giants and their leaders in there, and they were grilling them and asking questions. Trump is saying they were using that to coerce them to censor Trump. They were putting pressure on them saying, we're going to blow up your antitrust protections. We're going to get rid of Section 230 if you don't censor Trump. Senator, and this is from Mark Zuckerberg. Senator, yes, incitement of violence is against our policy, and there are not exceptions to that, including for politicians. Daily, the president shocks our conscience and shakes the very foundation of our democracy using powerful megaphone social media. I have urged a breakup of tech giants because they've misused their bigness and power. And indeed, Section 230 reform, meaningful reform, including even possible repeal in large part because their immunity is way too broad and victims of their harm deserve a day in court. So there's two ways to look at all these comments, right? Number one, you can look at it the way Trump does, saying they're putting pressure, saying we're going to repeal 230, we're going to get rid of it. And that is just to put pressure on them to censor Trump. Or at the time when I saw it, we did a podcast on this, if you want to go back and check it out, on Zuckerberg's hearing when he was answering all the questions and the questions that were coming at him, both sides were grilling big tech. It seemed like both sides wanted to put some restrictions on big tech. Both sides were kind of in unison saying they have too much immunity, they have too much power, yet Trump's acting like only one side was doing that. So I don't know. When I listened back to those, I didn't think that it was really one side putting more pressure than the other. So there were just more and more tweets and comments and questions about threatening these repeals of Section 230, which would significantly hurt these tech companies and open them up to tons of lawsuits, class action lawsuits. So on July 29, 2020, 4 big tech CEOs testified before the House in an antitrust hearing. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, Apple CEO Tim Cook, and Sundar Pichai defended their companies against accusations of anti-competitive practices. Okay, so this is what we want to protect from as a country, that just a couple people and a couple companies become so powerful they can erase you from the face of the earth. November 17, 2020, Zuckerberg came back and was questioned on speech moderation policies. That's more of the censoring conversation. Again, he talks more about how at these hearings, they really pressured Zuckerberg and the other tech giants. So here's another issue that Trump has. With him being removed from Twitter, it considerably made it more difficult for him to act as head of the Republican Party, campaign for Republican candidates, fundraise and lay the groundwork for his own potential campaign for the 2024 Republican Party nomination for President of the United States. What do you think about this? Do you think it's unfair that private companies censor one side or hurt one campaign and not another? Or do you think it's okay? Do you think companies should be able to do that? If they're a private company, do you think it makes a difference whether it's a restaurant or a private business who fully supports one candidate and not the other? Do you think it's different for Twitter and Facebook because they say it's a public forum? I think that's what Trump's getting at. This is not just a normal private company. They have 350, however many millions of users daily. So how does this differ from a normal private company? That's some of the questions that I have for you guys is, do you see this as a difference between, nobody cares when one restaurant or Goya comes out and, I mean, people have an issue with it, but people don't think it's weird if a private company supports one candidate or another, because a lot of times it lines up with what they believe. So is it okay for Twitter and Facebook? And by banning him, it makes it more difficult to communicate directly with the American public. Okay. Legislation significantly encouraged defendants' censorship of plaintiff and punitive class members. Okay, so here we go. A little bit more about Section 230, the Good Samaritan protection. Okay. So this is what Section 230 provides. Treatment of publisher or speaker. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Okay, that means if I post something on Twitter, it's me saying it, not Twitter saying it. Civil liability. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be held liable on account of any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. So it's saying we don't have to abide by those constitutional protections. If we find that it's obscene, we can get rid of it. Now, what's frustrating to me, and I'm sure a lawyer wrote this, I've written things like this, is it's too vague, okay? Obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing. I'm good with all that, right? There are definitions for all of those things. But when you throw things in as or otherwise objectionable, that's where it gets kind of hairy. Because now it's just subjective to whatever Twitter thinks is objectionable, they can get rid of, and they can get rid of you for. So that I do have a problem with, okay? Any action taken is another thing that they cannot be held liable for. Any action taken to enable or make available to information content providers or others the technical means to restrict access to material described in paragraph 1. Okay? So they can't be held liable for that. Although these two goals of Section 230, which again was to protect against human trafficking, really is what they were trying to do, against child pornography and sending things to children that shouldn't happen. And they didn't want tort-based lawsuits that would threaten the then fragile internet and freedom of speech and the new burgeoning internet medium. Although those were the two goals, it was never intended to provide a form of absolute immunity for any and all actions taken by interactive computer services. Section 230 is not a general prohibition of civil liability for website operators and other content hosts. But that's what it sounds like to me. When we just read 230, it does seem like blanket immunity. They can't be held liable for basically anything. In passing Section 230, Congress permits but does not mandate action be taken by social media platforms. It permits Twitter to take down or block speech deemed objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. And it also preempts all conflicting state laws, preventing such censorship from being made illegal by any provisions of laws of the state. Huge protections. Neither plaintiff nor putative class member were free to decline the speech restrictions imposed by Twitter. Okay, so here's another issue I have. There are issues throughout this lawsuit, okay? I think it's possible to disagree with Trump's position and also be against big tech, right? Because that's kind of where I'm feeling, is I don't want to give away my prediction here, but some of the stuff I just think falls a little bit flat, and I think that this is one of them. They said that Trump and the putative class members could not decline these rules of Twitter. But sure they could. They could just not use Twitter. You're not forced to use Twitter, right? You just can agree to those terms or services. It's just like when there were masks in restaurants. If the restaurant said you have to put on a mask before you come inside, you can choose whether or not you want to enter that restaurant with a mask or not, right? You get to make those decisions, and we're free to just go somewhere else. You're free to use some other platform. You don't have to use Twitter or to create your own platform. There was some talk of that. So I highlighted this because this is good. I mean, this is a good point by Trump. Rep. David, chair of the House Antitrust Subcommittee. So this person works specifically on the House Antitrust Subcommittee, called for the defendants, Twitter, to step in against Trump for posting lies and misinformation at a breathtaking clip, stating it is a threat to our democracy and should be suspended until all the votes are counted. So that's his comment, that's his opinion. But Trump is saying this is coercion, this is pressure. They even used the guy that's that's the chair of the Antitrust Subcommittee. He's not just anybody. Dorsey and Twitter acted to censor other medical opinions. So now we're going to get into, outside of violence, outside of some of the stuff Trump was doing, now we're going to get into misinformation, or what I'll call opinions. Dorsey and Twitter acted to censor other medical opinions that did not uphold that narrative of Dr. Fauci and the CDC. Okay, so he's saying you can't disagree with Fauci or the CDC. I have an issue with that. This is free speech. This is the stuff that's annoying to me that big tech does, is censor just kind of the people's voice. You know, we're not state actors. We're not the president. What we type out doesn't have the same effect. On January 20th of 2020, Twitter released a statement on its website entitled, "Helping the World Find Credible Information About the Novel Coronavirus." So are we supposed to now trust Twitter to tell us what's credible and what's not? I mean, I don't necessarily do that. I don't want to have to pick between trusting a politician or trusting big tech, right? I think should be a free thought and free speech exercise where we can all say what we think. You know, I have an issue censoring what people want to discuss and talk about and think about. And if they have questions, again, respectfully, right? If people are going to be crazy and make threats and make racist comments and hate speech and stuff like that, censor away, in my opinion. But just talking and having opinions and discussing these things is just where it goes too far, where that immunity is a problem, right? I don't have a problem with things that are crimes, right? Or things that are enhancements to crimes. Like, that should be able to be censored. We shouldn't want criminal activity. We shouldn't want child porn being posted on Twitter. Like, I think we can all get behind that. But what I have an issue with is we as the people, you and I sitting right in here, can't say, man, I think this treatment works for the coronavirus. I think this vaccine is better than that one, or no vaccine at all. I think we should be able to have those discussions. I think that's healthy. I think diversity is important, and diversity of thought is really important. All right, let's see here. Let's see what else we have. So then they go through a bunch of Trump's tweets that were taken down. Something like, flu season is coming up. Many people every year, sometimes over 100,000, despite the vaccine, die from the flu. Are we going to close down our country? No. We have learned to live with it, just like we're learning to live with COVID. In most populations, far less lethal. So it's comments like that, which they post in here to say, this is not inciting violence. This is his opinion. He's just saying what he thinks of COVID or the flu. Okay, the ban has directly impacted plaintiff's ability to communicate with family and friends. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that I think is unnecessary in the lawsuit that he puts. So here's what Jack Dorsey tweeted out. After a close review of recent tweets, or this is what Twitter Safety tweeted out. After a close review of recent tweets from @TheRealDonaldTrump account and the context around them, we have permanently suspended the account due to the risk of further incitement of violence. Then Dorsey tweeted, I do not celebrate or feel pride in our having to ban @real Donald Trump from Twitter or how we got there. After a clear warning, we'd take this action. We made a decision with the best information we had based on the threats to physical safety both on and off Twitter. Was this correct? So he's saying they gave him a warning, which I think is important. I think warnings are important. Let people know when they're doing something wrong. Maybe they don't know, and see if they fix it. As for plaintiff returning to Twitter one day, the company's CFO made it clear when he was on Squawk Box. He said Trump would never be allowed to return to the site, even if he decides to run for office again. So we know about what happened to Trump. But let's talk about plaintiff Linda Quadros. Maybe you guys know who this is. I don't know who she is. She seems like a normal person, except for the fact that she has 10,000 followers, so maybe she's more than a normal person. She used her Twitter to read news, push out content about large pharmaceutical companies and conservative ideals, and connect with her community. In 2019, she began noticing the defendants were censoring her account. Her account was suspended for 12 hours due to a post that said, "Shut up and twerk" to Cardi B. Plaintiff also experienced doxing by other Twitter account users. Plaintiff reported the incidences multiple times to defendant, and nothing was done to stop the sharing of her personal information. In 2020, her account was permanently banned due to a post about vaccines. I don't know this person. I'm not going to vouch for them. But if really they're posting about vaccines, or they're posting about the fact that their personal information is getting stolen and they get banned, seems sketchy. Your account has been, this is the letter they wrote to her. Your account has been suspended and will not be restored because it was for, I don't know what that means. Maybe, found, it might be cut off here, to be violating Twitter's terms of service. Okay. Then she responds, how is anything I said hate speech? Why am I permanently banned? A few months ago, I was suspended for 7 days when a man tried doxing me and trying to find out information about me online. You guys did nothing. So she doesn't understand, and they never responded to her. That's what the story is right now. So what's happening to more normal people than President Trump, I think, is more concerning than what's happening to him, because he made such a big show about it. He asked for everybody to look at it. He asked for, this type of stuff. And he knows, without a doubt, he knows that they have the Section 230 protections. He knows they're a private company. He knows they can make their own rules. Other people talking about, why does Twitter have these rules? Why does Facebook have these rules? And sometimes it's not just them. There's always somebody higher on the chain, right? We found out with Parler that they didn't censor stuff, right? They had their own rules. This is freedom of speech. This is free speech. You say whatever you want here. We're not going to censor you. And some stuff went on, and some speech was on there that was worse than questionable. And what happened? They didn't censor, but the Amazon servers booted them and erased them basically off the face of the earth, which is really scary, that a company that can have millions of dollars, heavy-hitting backers, a bunch of wealthy, powerful people backing it, and it can just be, it goes away, right? So that's kind of scary that big tech can do that. But Amazon has their rules and their conditions of service that they said that Parler was not abiding by, and Parler was warned. And when Parler didn't change, they were taken down, because Amazon's a private company and they can do what they want with their servers. So it always goes up the chain. It's not just one company's rule. All right, let's skip down here to the counts. So count 1 is the First Amendment violation. So these are the actual causes of action that Trump and his team are bringing. He is saying that even though Twitter is a private company, they are a state actor because they're working with Democratic politicians to censor Trump's speech, to affect elections, to affect votes, to affect campaigns, to affect fundraising, which is interesting, an interesting point. I saw some other comments that Trump has started a fundraiser for legal fees for this class action lawsuit. But he's saying that they became a state actor when they started acting on behalf of the Democratic politicians, and therefore they are subject to First Amendment. They are subject to constitutional restrictions. We'll see what happens. Censorship activities amount to a state action, okay? Dorsey is also sued in his official capacity along with Twitter itself for injunctive relief to and the unconstitutional censorship of the plaintiff and the class members. Count 2, declaratory judgment of unconstitutionality of Section 230 and the Communications Decency Act. Okay, so I don't remember when it was, but a year or two ago when Trump was in office, he signed an executive order trying to get rid of Section 230, trying to get rid of this immunity. So he's been behind this kind of the whole time, censoring big tech, taking away some of the immunity and power of big tech. Congress cannot lawfully induce, encourage, or promote private persons to accomplish what it is constitutionally forbidden to accomplish. So he's saying Congress is violating the Constitution by using big tech to censor speech. Okay, so it's kind of connecting chains. And I would agree that if Congress was doing this, if Congress was limiting free speech, it'd be a huge problem. Are they doing it via Twitter? What do you guys think? Are they doing it via big tech? Do they control big tech? What do you guys think? Let me know. And just to point out, so this Norwood v. Harrison, when they cite cases like that, those are decisions made in other cases. If you just see a date here and not a court, so this 1973 means the Supreme Court of the United States made this decision in 1973. Just a little into the weeds. All right, here's when they talk about class action allegations. We talked about this in other videos. You have to actually certify a class. You can't just say, hey, me and my 3 friends are a class. It has to be numerous. They have to be similarly situated. You've got to actually plead those things. Demand for jury trial, which I think is interesting because some of the stuff he's asking for is just the judge for a declaratory relief or an injunction, but he's also demanding a jury trial. And now, here we go. Prayer for relief. What is Trump asking for? An award of compensatory and punitive damages to the plaintiff in the class and an amount to be determined at trial. So he is asking for money damages. B, an injunction and declaratory judgment ordering Twitter to immediately reinstate the Twitter accounts of plaintiff and punitive class members. So this is a big one. He wants that Twitter account back. That's one of the things he's asking for. C, an injunction and declaratory judgment ordering Twitter to remove its warning labels and misclassification of all content of the plaintiff and the class to desist from doing it any further. So he doesn't want those little clips to come up saying this may be misleading or fact check this, it might not be true, things like that. Declaring the Communications Decency Act unconstitutional, an award of attorney's fees and costs to the plaintiff and the class and an amount to be determined at trial. An award of punitive damages, which he already asked for before, and usually you have to prove that punitives are necessary, but punitive damages go to punish a company. We've talked about this in a couple other videos as well. Punitive damages are on top of everything else, on top of all your losses, to punish this company and make sure other companies don't do the same things they do. And punitive damages are based on the company's worth. So they made $3.7 billion last year. Those punitive damages would be huge. And an award of such other and further relief as the court may deem just and proper. Start to get your questions in because we're almost done with this document. Last thing I want to touch on is the lawyers. So I've seen some political analysts and legal analysts say, well, these lawyers could be held in contempt or they could be sued themselves for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. They should know this is not going to be successful. Usually there has to be some fraudulent or gross negligence or willful conduct that's horrible and deplorable for lawyers for filing a lawsuit from their client, for the lawyers to actually have some blowback on them. So I think it's unlikely any of these lawyers are going to see legal trouble based on this lawsuit. Not saying they might do something else, as some of Trump's other lawyers have done and have had issues for, but just for this lawsuit, I think they can say they have a viable claim. They're going for it, and we'll see what happens. All right, so let's stop sharing here. We are done with the lawsuit for the most part there. We have gone through what the facts are, what Trump's asking for, why he's doing this, what kind of his arguments are going to be. And now it's time for us to kind of discuss and hear, for the people in here, what you think will happen. Trump's already said he's not going to settle. He's going to trial with this. Now, possible settlement types could look a bunch of different ways, right? There could be money. He could ask for the law to be changed. He could ask him to let him back on Twitter, let him run his campaigns, things like that could all be part of type of settlement negotiations. And success for Trump can look a bunch of different ways, right? He could dismiss this lawsuit and get rid of it with no money given to him if maybe he gets his Twitter account back. Or if maybe what he's looking for is his voter base, the 75 million people that voted for Trump, to stop using Twitter, stop using Facebook. But if you think about the social media addiction our country has, is that actually likely? Do you think that's actually going to happen? No matter how much people love Trump or voted for him or whatever it may be, do you think they will put their addiction and their pleasures aside for Trump? Will they get rid of that for Trump? If you watch some of the documentaries on this addiction, the answer is no, but we'll see what happens. I think that could be considered a win for Trump if they go over to some social media platform maybe that he creates. So we'll see what happens. All right. And then another question I'm going to ask you that I want to discuss is big tech too big? Are they too powerful? Should we try to do something to break up that monopoly? Okay. So those are some of the questions and things I want to discuss. Now I'm going to go through the comments here. Hopefully it's not too dangerous. Now I'm told some of these have been pinned, but I can't really see or tell which ones have been pinned. So let's see if we have any questions here. Big tech rarely gets in trouble for this kind of stuff. There are laws to protect them from the law. Correct. Hello from Texas and California, Vicky and Priscilla. Zainab saying he hates Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg. I think a lot of people are starting to feel that way. EEOC says you can't discriminate, even companies, or you can sue. So yes, but they would say they're not discriminating, right? They're saying everything they're doing is for the protection of the users, for health and safety. This is violent speech. This is hate speech. That's what they're saying. Do you agree or disagree? They're not. They are not. They will absolutely never say, we are censoring Republicans. We are censoring conservatives. We are censoring Trump supporters. They're not going to say that. That would be discrimination, I think. They decide what people see and don't see. I agree. All right, let's see. Yeah, so Vicky's saying she got put in Twitter jail. I've heard of a ton of people getting put in Twitter jail and Facebook jail for a day, a week, an hour, whatever it may be. And I didn't see any like violence in their, I mean, I didn't follow everything they posted, obviously, but it wasn't the same as Trump, we'll put it that way. All right, so Drastic Barber seems like a PR stunt to make himself look like a victim. He must be desperate for a platform to have sued tech giants. So I definitely think it's, I don't know if I want to say a PR stunt, but it's definitely going to get PR, and I'm sure that that's what he always does, right? That's his MO, is to get this PR. But I mean, I don't think he was desperate for this. I think this was in the works since January 7th, 2020. Yeah, people saying no, they don't read the terms and conditions. A couple people said they do. A couple people said always read the small print, butterfly. Okay. So this is interesting. So Starry, COVID-19 created a lot of issues, including with the election, but Trump picked 3 of the current justices on the Supreme Court and they wouldn't hear the cases. So I do think it's interesting. You know, I think there's a lot of checks and balances that should make this process pretty fair. Oh, this is what I wanted to say too with the jury trial. Imagine, so we talked about it with Chauvin, we talked a little bit about it with Ronnie O'Neill and some of the other trials. Imagine trying to pick a fair and impartial jury in this case. Trump versus Twitter, Facebook, Google. Find somebody that doesn't have opinions on those four things. Impossible, I say. We'll have to go overseas. And even then, so Starry, again, it's interesting. Trump is arguing that Harris and Michelle Obama used their free speech to influence Twitter, even if they were influenced. That is irrelevant. So I don't know if it's irrelevant if they actually did influence Twitter, but I do agree they should be allowed to state what they want, right? I mean, where do we draw the line? If you're a powerful person, are you not allowed to give opinions? Right? I mean, I think that Twitter and Facebook could say, we're not going to give in to what anybody says. We're not going to listen to what anybody says. But I think they're allowed to use their free speech as well, whether you agree with it or not. That's another important thing that I always want to mention, right? I'm in Florida. There are some people in Florida that think things are going great and they want DeSantis to do all sorts of executive orders. Then there are people in the United States that think everything is great and Biden needs to do all these executive orders. But the pendulum always swings. Whatever party you're in, whatever ideology you agree with is not always going to be in power. So you don't just want to create a bunch of one-sided rules that only affect one side, because all that's going to be undone and done the other way whenever somebody else is in power. And we don't want that pendulum swing and to have to adjust to that as a country every 4 years. Rules should be fair for both sides. Both sides should apply them similarly. And I always say that, and that's so important. People lose sight when they're in power. So Hankster, how many millions are donated to these politicians from big tech? Probably a lot. And I'd be willing to bet Trump got some donations from big tech as well, or that he's supported them in the past. I don't know that. I'm not saying that as a fact. I just wouldn't be surprised. So here's another good point by Starry. Getting lots of comments in. He agrees they're biased against Republicans. I guess somebody else must have said that. But also Cruz, DeSantis, Holly, Rubio, et cetera, can still use Twitter. It's a good point. They're not, that's what I'm saying. They're not just saying we're getting rid of all Republicans. We're getting rid of that ideology as a whole. That would be discriminatory. So Nina Mill just tuned in. Does he have a chance to win? That's all I want to know. So let's get some predictions here. I think that he has little to no chance at actually being successful in this class action lawsuit if it were to go to a jury trial. Now, I do think, because there's always a possibility that some kind of resolution is found, some kind of settlement or some kind of give and take and quid pro quo legally happens here, where he agrees to not post certain things and gets his account back instead of the lifetime ban or something. I wouldn't be surprised if something came from this that Trump can call a win, as opposed to just an outright jury trial and loss for Trump. I would be surprised if that was how this ended. Their company, their rules, as long as it's not discriminatory to a protected class. Brianna, that is how the current state of the law is in our country. So Elizabeth, I don't know if you're responding to somebody else's comment. This would be a little bit different because it's private conversation. This is public, right, for everybody to see. So Lynn Ann, these social media companies try to stop free speech. Twitter suspended me for liking a certain guy who shot up his school, just a picture of him. Okay. Being blocked on 3 social media platforms says something. Oh, being blocked on 3 social media platforms says something, doesn't it? Yeah, it wasn't just one, but that's one of the issues with this antitrust. Are they all in cahoots, big tech? Are they all there to make sure that they're the only ones making the money? First time that is putting the First Amendment on stuff. It's actually not. So there have been other cases like this. Other cases similar to this saying that these tech companies and these social media companies are basically public actors and or state actors, and therefore they should be subject to the First Amendment, and that Section 230 should go away, and they've all been unsuccessful in the past. But nobody with as much power and money and PR clout as Trump. So Starry, again, the medical censoring is really bad, especially with all the unknowns when COVID first became a thing. I agree. Even Fauci himself disagreed with himself at different points once he got more information. That's how it works. When you have something we've never seen before, you take the information you have, you do the best with it, and you have to make decisions. You have to act at some point when you're in their position. So even they went back and forth, their own medical experts in the CDC, and the CDC disagreed with other government medical entities, right? So they all weren't always on the same page. So censoring certain opinions about that was really weird to me, especially when we don't even know what's true and what's not. That was really weird to me. And that wasn't inciting violence. That wasn't harassing for the most part. I guess it could have been. But that was, I mean, but it could technically have been objectionable under the Twitter rules. That's the issue with that. And Lauren, exactly. I don't have to agree with your opinion, but I should respect you enough to listen. I agree with that. But even taking it a step further, if you don't want to respect me enough to listen, scroll past, right? I mean, we don't have to read certain tweets. We don't have to react to certain tweets. We can unfollow. We can mute if it bothers us. So that's the other thing, is like we have some control over this process and about what comes in front of us as users. We don't even have to listen or read other people's opinions about COVID or the vaccine or whatever it may be. So here's another thing. So Vicky, if you turn to Twitter for news, I feel sorry for you. So much misinformation. I was just talking about this with somebody the other day about how some people go to bloggers or whatever that are just normal people in college or whatever, and they go to them as an expert on a certain fact or on a certain, thing that's going on in the news, like COVID. Some people are going to just somebody who has no education or experience dealing in medicine or no education or experience dealing in COVID or viruses or anything like that, and they listen to them. What are you going to do about that? If somebody's going to listen to that person, then there's nothing you can do, right? Or you can listen to people that are educated on the topic that you're discussing, right? And you can choose who you want to listen to. You can choose what you believe. Nobody's going to force you to believe something about a certain fact or medical opinion or anything like that. So while I may disagree with it, while I may not try to get my information from that person, if you do, I do think censoring that's getting a little overreaching by these big tech companies, and I'd feel the same way if the government was doing it. Yeah, Lauren asks, no one should be banned unless they're truly up to no good. Opinions shouldn't be banned. I agree. It seems like everybody agrees. Opinions should not be banned. So, Slimderella, they're still shadow banning 80 million Trump supporters. So what I think she's talking about is a lot of people are complaining that their followers are dropping from like 40 million down to 80,000, or the people viewing their tweets are plummeting because the algorithm is crushing conservatives or crushing Republicans, things like that. That's a lot harder to prove. That's a lot harder to get the data on. I'm not sure how we would do that. I'm sure somehow, some way you can get that data, but we'll see. So Nina Mill, I don't necessarily disagree with you. You can find everything on Twitter from violence to porn. Don't understand why this weighs more. I agree. And I think that, I mean, I don't know what your total sentiment is, but like, especially these opinions or misinformation that we disagree with, like people's opinions on there, there's much worse. Like these videos get out of people murdering other people or pornography or things like that that you would never want kids to go on, and kids can have their own Twitter account. And or even other people shouldn't see half of the stuff that gets posted on Twitter. So we're not banning that, which is kind of what Section 230 was in place, was to protect that type of material from going up on the internet. And it's not. And I agree, so many terrible things are up on the internet for anybody to see, any child of any age to see, but they're picking and choosing certain things. And I think that's what Trump is getting at. Again, some of this, people are saying Trump asked for this. He poked the bear. He tried to push it as far as he can and make a mockery of the whole system. And I agree, he did ask for some of it and got on here and really fought with everybody and was really loud on Twitter. And, you know, I think it affected a lot of what's going on and a lot of how people think about him now. But I agree, there's so much worse on the internet. So Lorraine, I don't know what you mean. Does it matter that they're using the internet to provide their services? It matters the servers and the private companies that they're using, yes, like Amazon, because if they do something Amazon disagrees with, Amazon can get rid of them. So Elizabeth, discovery will be interesting. Any communication between tech and government officials or political party will make it more spicy. I want to see what they're actually going to turn over discovery, or what's going to be blocked. I bet there's going to be a ton of objections, a ton of documents blocked that people are not going to disclose. All right, let's see what else we have here. I agree with this. I tell this to people all the time that ride really hard for politicians. They all have iffy stuff surrounding them. They're all people. They're all human. I don't vouch for any of them. We'll just put it that way. So Butterfly thinks Trump is just proving a point. Lorraine, no way you can get a fair jury. I don't get it. I don't understand how you'd even start. Like, what questions would you ask? Have you ever heard of Donald Trump? Have you ever heard of Facebook? Depends on which side of the aisle the jury's on. He's got a 50-50 shot based on the last election. Hey, that's a good point. Sorry again. Trump will get some minor win out of this, maybe some better customer service to explain bans. Yeah, that'd be great. If they did better explanations when they banned people like the other lady that's a class member, maybe that's a win. Elizabeth, I think I disagree with you here. I usually agree with a lot of your comments. Just out of curiosity, does anyone remember anything about Trump before he ran for office, that he literally had the same opinion on this kind of thing? He did have the same opinion on this kind of stuff, but he did not have the same political opinions. He's flip-flopped back and forth. He's supported presidents on both sides of the aisle. He was always a businessman. He was always doing what's best for Trump, in my opinion, as a businessman. And I don't think he's been consistent on everything from before he was president. I always thought it was weird that he ran for president. He was generally beloved before he was president. Lots of people loved him. He was at courtside seats at basketball games. He was on TV shows. He was featured in movies like Home Alone 2. And he was just known as like a successful businessman. And now he's one of the most hated guys by half the country. So not arguing, which is always appreciated, Lorraine, but I'm interested to know why you think a jury would not side with Trump. I don't necessarily think a jury would not side with Trump. I actually think if it really went the distance, I think some of these counts could be thrown out by a judge before they even get to a jury. Thanks, Nina. Glad to have you here. Now's probably a good time. If you guys haven't already, please go subscribe to our channel so you can be involved in our future lives. We take a lot of suggestions from the listeners, from the people on what to talk about here. I love the connection and interaction that we get, because I love to hear what potential jurors say about cases I may try. I love to hear about what the people think about these laws and what's going on in our country, because I think there are a lot of bad apples out there on social media and a lot of good people that have a lot of good thoughts. And I can just tell by the comments, there are people of both political parties in here. We're able to have some discussions and not have too many issues. We're able to discuss why we think differently about things. And I think that's really important and something our country's lost. So we like that on our channel. I try to be down the middle on most stuff as far as it goes with personally, but I give my opinion when I see something. I see issues with big tech. I've got major issues with big tech, and I hope that this does create some change there, even if I don't think some of the things Trump's asking about or doing in here is going to be successful. So that's how I like to think. That's how I like to talk logically. Let's, discuss these topics together, and I think we can have a lot of fun and all learn from each other. So go subscribe to our page and like this video if you haven't already. Ah, that was you, Starry, asking me about those tuna sandwiches. I'm not kidding. I had to stop reading those articles because of how many tuna subs I ate in college from Subway with that sweet onion sauce or sweet onion teriyaki, whatever that sauce was on there. Whatever was in there is living inside me. A lot of people joined after the Ronnie O'Neal case. That was unlike anything else. So, a preacher that was banned from YouTube. That's interesting. So this is a good question. Does Twitter have an oversight board on bans like Facebook does that could lower the ban length? I don't know. I also don't know how the process works with Facebook and Twitter. I've never been banned on them. But I know on YouTube, especially with a lot of the Ronnie O'Neal stuff, ours was flagged as not suitable for children or limited monetization or whatever because of the content, because it was violent, talking about everything that happened in the Ronnie O'Neal trial. Made it banned for that. And I know you can appeal to somebody else. It was a bot that said it was that type of material. We could appeal to a person to look at it. We didn't do that because, whoever wanted to watch it, I figured watch it. If the algorithm didn't pick it up, it didn't pick it up. But so yeah, I know that there are different ways you can appeal the process. I haven't looked too far into it. That's true, Nina. Humans make mistakes and there's misinformation and lots of people have agendas. Trump should be able to be online. Not liking him isn't grounds for complete termination. It is kind of weird, with how often his social media was in the news and in front of us, and now he's just gone. It's kind of weird. But I guess some people are happy with it, but it's very weird. It is kind of scary that big tech can ban somebody like Donald Trump and can just totally erase something as big as Parler was becoming like that. It's kind of scary to think of as just like a normal person in the world. Yep, Sharon, something I know I mentioned as well. Twitter's a private company. Users agree to their rules or they can go somewhere else, basically. And Elizabeth, that could be true. He could be pushing for some stuff that's going to come out in Discovery that he's definitely going to use, and we're definitely going to see more of. I don't know how he's going to get it out since he's not allowed on Twitter. Do you think Donald Trump has a burner account? Anybody think so? How do they do that? How do they stop him from just creating like John Doe 45 or something like that? Do you think it's out there? The MZ, yeah. A desperate fundraising appeal disguised as a lawsuit. It was weird. It's always weird when I see stuff like that. Yeah, I mentioned that, MZ, that they started a fundraiser. So I don't know, Starry. I don't think so. I don't think so. They've been involved in other decisions that have involved Trump and involved that. I don't think they'll have to recuse themselves, no. Interesting, Donna. Suspended on Twitter the same day as Trump with no warning. See, that's always the other problem I have, right? We're just people. We talk all the time about how one of the things I like to do is add value, try to explain the legal process, explain some backgrounds of how lawyers look at this, how the law deals with this, because I assume some people come here because they don't know. I can tell by some of the comments. Some of you guys know a lot about the law and how it works. But I like to answer those questions and talk about that because there's certain things people don't understand. That's just like me with a lot of other things outside the law that I just don't understand. So I like to get that information. So that's why I think warnings are so important. People sometimes don't understand why something's getting flagged, especially if they say something about COVID or a vaccination or some kind of medical stuff that they care about and they get banned. I think a warning is more appropriate to let them understand why it is you're banning them. And maybe they'll just want to leave. If you're not letting them have their free speech, maybe they'll just leave. But I do think banning with no warning is not a good practice for any social media company. Lauren S., I don't know. Tech is not one of the things I know much about. Maybe they've got his IP address blocked or something, but I don't know. Can he just go somewhere else and do it? All right. So I think that is about the end of, oh, it said thousands of us were banned. And also banned on Facebook. So I don't know if it has something to do with the January 6th Capitol riots, if that's what maybe had banned like a bunch of people that posted similar things like that. I don't know. But like I said, stay tuned and make sure you subscribe. We have a lot more coming on that January 6th day, the facts surrounding it, some things you probably didn't know, definitely some things you haven't seen. We went into the Capitol for a tour while nobody else was allowed in there. And it's really interesting, some of the stuff we have coming out. So make sure you subscribe to our page. Make sure you like this video because we'll talk more about that in the future at a certain time. So thank you everyone for being here. Make sure you subscribe, like our video, and we'll be back with you on the next one. Continue to tell us what you want to see. When anything big like this happens, I'll try to do a live and react to it, but it's so much fun with you guys. So thanks for being here and we'll talk next time.